Hello, everybody. Dr. Mary Crowley for Now is the Time. Today actually is April 9, and it is a new paradigm. Actually, 120 years ago today, the great Azusa Street outpouring happened right here in the city of LA. That's where I am. And anyway, the enemy is going to have to pay because God is turning everything upside down. And he's actually going to put upon our head a crown. And he's going to take from the crown which had been England. And we're going to see some mighty things that God is going to do in the culture. On today's show, I've got Good Dog, who is actually an investigative journalist. He's got a podcast called Q Bits. He's been on the show several times. He knows a lot about history. He's a man of mystery, and he's an amazing man of God and also a good friend. Welcome to the show today, Good Dog. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Well, you know what? We're just we're moving it down the field, and we are seeing a great outpouring of God's Spirit. You know, right now, this coming Saturday in Los Angeles at the Coliseum, where the USC, has their arena. It's called the Coliseum, and there's going to be an event called Hope LA. It was 10 years ago. There was something called Azusa Now, and it's basically remembering what happened 120 years ago, but God is bringing something greater than that. So it's really exciting. You know, it's always the darkest before the dawn. And so we've had a lot of things that have happened in the media and the news. It looked like there was a deadline on Tuesday night with President Trump, and it looked like said he was going to annihilate Iran, but we know some of that was just I don't know, for the playbook Sun Tzu art of war. But let's get into some of that initially, eventually, right now. But then we can get into some of the different things of how we're on this verge and the cusp of something great happening. And it has all the earmarks of that. And maybe look at a past move, including Azusa and including what happened when the pilgrims first came here from England, which literally was a miracle of God. So, Good Dog, what's going on right now? What is your of what's happening with what just happened with President Trump and Iran?
Sure. Okay, so looking at what has been happening with the United States and what is going on with the global power, there is a global power that has been in place for centuries and not out in the open. It's allowed the United States to take primacy as far as role, but the real power behind the throne, so to speak, has been England. It has been England since Queen Elizabeth's era, and it has to do with the global trade system, which is managed by the crown. And the currency that is controlled by the crown and out of the Bank of England is permissive. And they withhold permission and they provide permission such that it serves the crown. And so all the wars that we have seen since have all of them benefited the crown. And what's happening right now is a deconstruction of that construct. That's what we're seeing writ large. The secondary level, when you get underneath that, how is that happening? What's going on with Trump? Trump is simply showing things the way that they are. And it's very impolitic the way he does it, because what is happening right now, the reality of what's happening, is itself impolitic. It's not popular. It's not something people would vote for. It's very antagonistic. You see a lot of people saying, well, it's Trump doing this, it's Trump doing that. It's not actually. What's happening is Trump is simply exposing it. And people don't like what they see. And let me give an example. One of the things that has happened is that over the last 50 years, um, Iran has been used as a proxy to cause religious strife amongst different groups. And this division and segregation and bifurcation and separation of the people, which is drawn along religious lines, has been emanating out of the Levant, which is what Britain called this holy area, this Middle East. We call it the Middle East today, but back in the day they called it the Levant. And this was an homage to biblical times. And the country that has been used as the nexus for the emanation of global terror has also been a captive British construct and been done through British intelligence and the Central Intelligence Agency, which
So
is
you're
Iran.
saying that Iran has been captive. Well, and just to interject, I was just in Israel, and I was there. I flew in on 222. I left on February 22nd, flew into to Israel, and 5 days later on Purim, actually the missiles started hitting us from Iran, and it was very symbolic. Of course, that was the Persia in the Bible, and so it's interesting the timing of all these different things that are happening. And so, anyway, so Iran is pretty much been a puppet. Are you saying of like England?
Yes, and it's the spirit that is driving England. I should say, ultimately, all the principalities, which are regions of territory and space, and powers, that is to say, those spirits that control each of those territories or spaces. This is what is that is what is behind what is going on with President Trump, what is going on behind the scenes with the British Crown, why it is that we see an apparent dislocation between U.S. and NATO, which was on display yesterday with Mark Rutte coming to the White House. Mark Rutte, just so you know, he's the leader of NATO, came to the United States. President Trump has made no secret of the fact he's interested in disconnecting from NATO. I don't think that's going to happen, incidentally, but I will just report that that's what's being talked about right now. And then the reason is because the United States is there for NATO, like when the Ukrainian Nazis wanted to develop biological weapons on Russia's doorstep, and the Russians didn't like that, and they decided to, invade like we would invade Mexico if they were doing that. Um, the NATO wanted us to defend Ukraine as the Nazi Ukrainians, if as if they were NATO members, but they never were. So the United States jumped in both feet under Biden, or I should say the old Biden regime, and they were actually behind much of the weaponization and the conflagration, which has cost 1 million Russian lives at this point. So they're fighting with a cause, and the thing is, what's in it for the United States? There's nothing in it. So President Trump pointed that out a year ago or 14 months ago, and his people did also when they went a year ago to Brussels to meet with not just NATO leaders, but the European Union members, and basically read them the Riot Act. What is it that we share that we're defending you? Was the question. It's a reasonable question. And the reason for that was that the notion of freedom itself, the very essence of freedom, is being denied Europeans, but is being showered upon illegal invaders that are military-aged men coming without their families. You don't travel to another nation as a military-aged man without your family as a group of millions, as part of a group of millions, unless you're an invader. And that's what's going on. That's the cold hard truth of what's going on. And the reason for that, there's several reasons for that. First, the noble state of royals who call them humans who call themselves kings. They don't like and don't appreciate having to bow down to the interests of common men. And so they're fighting against that just as they did back in the British Civil War of 1648. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the same conflagration, the same coming to Jesus moment where the people are being tested. Do you have the will to defend yourself, or are you willing to sacrifice your children on the altar of this man's pride? And that's really what's going on. And that was the same thing that propelled the Puritans to the United States. And most people don't know, but John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, was himself was a Puritan, and that simply meant the pure word of God. They weren't interested in hearing the king's opinion of the word of God. They wanted to hear God's word itself without any adulteration, without any coloring. And so this is really what we're seeing today. It's the same battle as it was back then, with the same consequences and frankly the same bloodshed that is in the offing. The issue is, how long will we continue fighting amongst ourselves instead of fighting against those that are causing this strife to begin with, which are those behind these cloistered walls? That's really the question. That's what's playing out on the world stage right now.
Well, and I know you have some clips you show. I think a lot of people, uh, when they heard what President Trump had put out on True Social, using the F word and things like that. What kind of break that down a little bit about what's happened in Iran with the oil and that particular narrative that President Trump put out.
Okay, so that has to do with language, which was the what I wanted to cover today. But I think it really begs a larger question. What was Trump saying with his F bomb tirade? I think that's a reasonable question. And the answer is surprising because I didn't know this when I started looking into it. At first, I didn't believe he did it because it's on Easter. Why would you throw the F bomb out on Easter? That I don't understand. And we have to remember it was just a year ago that the NAMBLA crowd, the men and women who want to predate children sexually, a year
Well, and
ago.
that's the National Association of Man Boy Love Association.
Yeah, it's part of the
NAMBLA. Yes.
LGBTQ plus I or IA plus, and the
Yeah.
plus stands for little kids. So that's a bonus, right? So
Right.
the point of that was a year ago they were, the Biden regime was running the show, and their Easter featured groups that were friendly toward this point of view. And
Yeah.
most Americans aren't. Most Americans look at that as an abomination and something that needs to be stopped with violence if needs be. And so it's a bright line. I think this is the bright line between good and evil that we're seeing that's being drawn right now. And some people are on one side of it and they are completely fine with, adults raping children, and others that are on the other side of it that don't want to see that happen. And there is some public controversy over that topic. This Easter was different, though. Trump's commentary was specifically directed above the heads of those controlling the economics of the situation in Iran,
Mhm.
the Brits, but instead to the people. This has to do with the civilizational context of that tweet or that truth. And what he had said was, if you listen to what he said, President Trump in the first half was paraphrasing a phrase that George Patton had
Mm.
delivered when he was going up against the Nazis.
Mm.
And when he was going up against the Aryan Nazis, George Patton dropped the F bomb multiple times. In fact, we're going to kill them sons of bitches and blah, blah, blah. And it goes worse. That was Patton. That was classic Patton. And the second part of what he said, of what Trump said, was an homage to the civilizational end. And this civilizational end was being spoken to the people with the oldest civilization on planet Earth.
Mm.
So Trump was making a comment that if we don't stop these Nazis, these global fascists, then we won't have a civilization. This was not an end to Iranian civilization, as was falsely understood by the media, I think purposely, incidentally, but instead of all mankind, because it would cause a third world war and there would be no civilization afterwards. That was really what Trump was saying. This is a choice between life and death. Make your choice. And what happened, of course, in the next hours, this was at 10 a.m. on that day. There was other things happening at the same time, and I want to juxtapose this in a moment. So I'll come back to Artemis 2 in a moment. But at the same time that this is going on, President Trump started a bombing campaign hours ahead of the 8 p.m. deadline. Why would he do that? Well, he was doing that basically to say, this isn't a fake bluff. This is a one off. You're either going to do this or we're going to end you. And he was specifically talking to the Aryans that are running the show in Iran. Iran, the Germanic pronunciation of Iran back in the 430s to 650s, which is where this gets its prominence, was Aryan. They couldn't pronounce the I in Iranian. So they were describing as Aryans. This is where Hitler got his idea of the Aryan race, the Aryan nation, the Aryan construct that was driving global, or driving what he wanted to be global Nazism. People mistake Hitler's actions as being National Socialism, but as soon as he crossed the Sudetenland, as soon as he crossed the Polish border, and he went in and he started taking over other countries, it was no longer national, it was international. It was global socialism that he was advancing. And so, because of this use of language and misdirection of the language, we forget the fact that the British Crown was behind the Nazis from the beginning. In fact, it was Chamberlain. It's very ironic because yesterday President Trump says, we don't want another Chamberlain. What was he talking about? Trump was talking about the British Crown's prime minister back when Hitler was making his entree into a NATO or a North Atlantic ally, Poland. When he broke into that land, Hitler was had the prime minister go over, Neville Chamberlain, and negotiate with Hitler's guy, and basically came back with a contract or a treaty that said they'll stop, which of course was nonsense. They weren't going to stop at all. They were going to continue. That's what Nazis do. There's no end to it. It's a spiritual war at the end of the day, and it's not going to be withheld by a piece of paper. So that piece of paper wasn't worth anything. And that's what President Trump was saying. I don't want another Chamberlain. And so in the context of that, President Trump is offering that at the same time he did a 2-week pause. So that should tell us that this 2-week pause is not going to end well. This is going to end.
Now, when did the 2-week pause start?
It started, hang on, I'll look it up. Just a moment. The 2-week pause started technically on Monday at 8 p.m. So that goes through the 20th, from the 6th until the 20th. But there's a couple other things that are happening in the background I wanted to bring up, because what's going on with Trump is multidimensional. And not only is Trump showing us what we don't want, which is global socialism, which is fascism with everybody living in a 300 square foot cage, and the inability to travel outside walking distance from your home forever, and living on subsistence slavery labor, our wages, and the ability for the globalists to predate us as they please for organ harvesting and other purposes. That's really where that's where the Agenda 2030 goes, if you look at it. That's not where we want to end up, because in that universe, that dark age, there's no history that's going to be written, and there will be nobody to count the bodies. And so we would be, if we went down that path, we would be as hopeless as the 100 million Chinese who were killed during the Cultural Revolution, who are today completely disavowed. Those deaths didn't happen. It was only 1 million. No, it was only 100,000. Nope, it was only 5,000. Nope, it was only 1,000. It never happened. That's the construct of communism, which covers up these deaths as if they never occurred, because they don't matter to the current. And that was the cost of doing business. And that's what we don't want. We don't want any part of that. So what do we want instead? And this is what Trump is doing on the other side. So what happened on the 1st of April, it's very interesting, the 1st of April, a spaceship launched from Cape Canaveral and went around the moon. And it was called, in the name of this thing was, the project is called Artemis 2, the entire mission, which is to have mankind reach out to the stars. But the name of the capsule, the command pod within that, was called Integrity. And so what President Trump is, because it was the Trump administration that named that capsule, um, the the point of this is that you can't reach for the stars and get past the earthly bounds of small little men like King Chuck. You can't do that unless you have integrity. Every person must have integrity. That's the point.
Well, when you say King Chuck, you're talking about King Charles
Yeah, King Chuck.
in, yeah, in England. Yeah.
Not a
Well, you
fan.
know,
Not a fan.
no, I know,
He's everything worse in a human leader. In fact, it's a lot like Saul.
no, the royal family, the Windsors isn't even really royal. They pretty much abducted the throne, and aren't they German?
Yes, they're German. Yeah,
Yeah.
they come
Well,
from
let
the same region as the Rothschilds, right? So,
the Rothschild. Well, so let's get back. You said you had a couple clips that you wanted to
oh sure,
show too.
sure. So let's put it into context. Um, so we've got a melee that's happening right now on the global stage, and each of us are actors on God's stage. And so it's within the construct of actors that we are each of us showing which side of the God's ledger we're on. We're either with the sheep or on with the goats. And sadly, I think there's so many people choosing to be on the side of the goats. It's not good. Because I have family members that are still on that side, and it's very frustrating to see because it's so obvious to me. But but that's what they're choosing to do. They're choosing to support the globalist agenda, not understanding where it goes and what it is that truly they're supporting. And so, what's the alternative? I mean, when you look at the alternative, what are we faced with? Well, the globalist side has AI on its side, which, if you want to replace human labor and human intellect, AI is a great way to ape that, which is what it does. It's a very bad imitation of humanity if you've ever played around with AI. So you understand how absolutely horrid it is. And it has no imagination itself. It simply regurgitates and rehashes everybody else's stuff, but does so in a way that is lacking any soul. So when you read anything written by AI or you look at anything that has been generated by AI, it might look spectacular and be performed perfectly, but it's lacking something, and that something is the spark of divinity that God has blessed each of us with. And this idea of the spark that God has blessed us with is where the alternative sits. This is the other side of the ledger. This is the alternative to what Trump is showing us with the space program. Instead of being very interested in our own small piece of this tiny pie on planet Earth, President Trump is trying to get us to think expansively, to think like a new world, just as it was for the time of the Pilgrims. And instead of going across the ocean to a new world, we would be going across the ocean of space to new worlds, plural, without limitation and with nothing but opportunity in front of us. That is the inflection point we're at. And if we choose the side of God and godliness, then what we're choosing is the truth. And the truth, at integrity's root, is the truth. And God is the truth, and the truth is the Word. So this notion then of the Word turns out to be absolutely critically important. And this is, I think, one of the things that's lost in the wash. People don't want to be bored with the Word because, after all, there's so many things happening right now. But if you stand back and you look at what the Word is actually conveying, it conveys the very spark of existence, the spark of God, the Word of God even, This was the very purpose that drove the pilgrims from the shores of, well, frankly, Plymouth. And what was doing that was they wanted the pure word of God. And they weren't willing to sacrifice and receive any other human aping God's form, which is the way that, when King Henry kicked out the Catholics and installed himself as the head of the church. What was happening was he was having his religious, in particular the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was having his religious theologians create weekly sermons that would make the king look good and make his actions defensible within a biblical construct. But they were making up parts of the Bible and using that as a justification for the king's actions. Now, the way you'd find that is if you actually had the Bible written in English where people could understand it. And this idea then of the word and getting it into English was super important. So what the Puritans did, going back, this is at the beginning of the first Great Awakening, the first real Great Awakening. It had to do with putting that word into English. And the Puritans paid for it out of their own pocket and had it produced in Switzerland because that was a neutral country. And this production we called the Geneva Bible. Now, the Geneva Bible, it was done over a period of years. It was not completed all at once. But when it was finally completed, King Henry was near death. And basically the person who did this, Tyndale, was crucified. He was killed for the privilege of doing this, but his work lived on. And it wasn't until King James came along where they wanted to soften some of the language, some of the some of the interpretations of the scripture that the Tyndale group had done in the Geneva Bible, so that the justification for human kings would be paramount. This is what we call the King James Bible. So it actually misses the point and washes out some of the key constructs, some of the key warnings that God had about human kings, which the Puritans were well versed in. They knew all about it. They were being persecuted. If you think it's bad about, MAGA today and January 6th, what do you think the attack on Parliament by, what's his name? The guy with the mask, the Guy Fawkes, was all about? It was the same thing. It was an attack by separatists, people who wanted to break up the kingdom and didn't want to listen to the king as the head of the church. That was what it was. And eventually this became required liturgy in British schools. In fact, it is to this day. You have to learn about Guy Fawkes. Why is that relevant? Well, it's absolutely relevant if you're following what's going on with January 6th. Democrats are saying we've got to install and make it mandatory that children learn how absolutely terrible the January 6th treasonists were. This is simply a reiteration, a recreation of the very same false construct that was slathered upon poor Guy Fawkes, who was drawn and quartered at the end of the day. He had a pretty rough go. And he wasn't alone. And this idea then of vilifying a disfavored political cohort within the major part of the group is something that lives on because it's the same spirit.
Well, and I just want to interject here. We're at the cusp of of an awakening, a great awakening, in fact. And I'm working on a book about destiny of a nation that there's a lot of things that we're seeing as earmarks. And so I want to address that there was actually a film that just came out that called A Great Awakening that I just went and saw last weekend, and you went and saw a few days ago as well. And it shows the earmarks of what was happening in England. And many times you said they just ended up sending them to America. And so why don't we go over a little bit of that because I've got different things I want to cover. And Good Dog is just so brilliant. He can go down these paths of knowing so much about history, which and this is really amazing. A lot of this is going to be covered in the book that I'm coming out with in the future. But Good Dog, where are we today? I know that you were going to actually. Do you have a couple clips to show us before we get into the Great Awakening that
Sure,
you wanted
sure.
to show?
Yeah, let me just, before we jump into the clip, I'll include one clip and I'll keep it simple. But to stand back and look at this, what the Great Awakening is, God is already awake. God
Yeah.
is awaking up his people and people who call themselves by his name. And this context then of humans being awakened to the truth, which has been denied us, once you've been tagged to deliver the truth, it becomes part of you. You can't separate yourself from it. In fact, so much so, it doesn't matter what the enemy threatens us with because you're willing to even die for it because you understand that this life it's truly just a construct. It's just a stage, and we're only on it for a little while anyway. So you might as well just, go out there and kick butt. And that's really what's going on. So in the film that just came out, which is really good, it talks about a great awakening when a guy from England comes to the United States or comes to the New World, and he continues his evangelism in a way that is transformative. Now, I think what the film gets I get the Holy Spirit telling you this is so amazing, is the Spirit of God speaking through him. It captures that and does so in a very believable way because you feel it as you're listening to it. There's a few things that got wrong, but they're not fundamentally wrong. It's just wrong in kind. So it's a slight error, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's take a look at the Great Awakening. They call it the Great Awakening. There was a book written in 1728 called The Great Awakening, which was 11 years before this guy showed up on the American stage, so to speak, the pulpit. And if you go back to what was going on at this time, the pulpit was where people got most of their information. They did get some of it from newspapers like the Philadelphia Current, which was Benjamin Franklin's publication. They did get it from other similar publications, but by and large, they got most of their news from what was happening behind the pulpit, and so it became a fountain of information, and that's where this thing kicks off. So let's dive into that. Let me.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing movie. And so if you are watching this, you should try to go out and see it before it leaves the theaters. As many of us can go, in particular on opening weekend and opening week. And it's very important because they'll continue to keep it playing in the theaters.
Yeah, I strongly recommend this movie. So that said, let's dive right in. Here's the trailer to it. Oh, wait a minute. Can you hear the sound on that?
Yes.
Okay, I
Yes,
want to
I
make
can
sure
hear it.
I want to make sure that the sound is being recorded. Just a moment. Sometimes it doesn't do that, right?
I could hear the sound.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go.
Arise, O sleeper! Awaken!
Benjamin Franklin, your brother said he could use your help at his print shop. You have my blessing.
Gonna do good things, Pa. Great things.
From the oceans through the valley.
George Whitfield, you will be an extraordinary preacher.
Remember the source of your power.
You don't believe the stories from London are true?
I am doubting Whitfield's claim that he can be heard and understood by so many. Without evidence, I won't believe it.
Let us proclaim freedom to the captives! Whom the sun sets free is free indeed!
Have you ever heard a voice like that? The blast from heaven.
Benjamin Franklin.
Reverend Whitfield, partnering with me would guarantee the maximum benefit to your cause.
A match made in heaven.
Or just a deal made in a print shop.
General George Washington.
Today, we stand in an even darker valley.
The survival of this country must be our chief concern.
This Constitution cannot fail. We cannot let the sun set on this nation.
You are lighting a powder keg, my friend.
When you follow him, you are led by love. Why can't I get through to you?
I choose evidence over faith. Stop trying to change me.
You have promoted the greatest awakening these colonies have ever seen.
You are the lightning bolt, George. I am just the lightning rod.
And who is the source, Ben?
Let them receive your gift of salvation.
One tiny candle illuminates 1,000.
Arise, O sleeper! Awaken!
You know, I love that movie. It was so good.
Yeah.
I want to go see it again. It was that good. And I don't usually see movies more than once because I kind of remember all the scenes. But in that one, what did you think of it? I mean, before I dive in.
Well, it was amazing. You know, like as I said today, there was a great awakening that happened here in Los Angeles when a black man, William Joseph Seymour, came to the city of Los Angeles in 1906. He actually arrived on February 22nd, and he was called to speak in a church that he was going to become he was the pastor of, but he was believing for an outpouring of the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues. And when he preached his first sermon, when he came back that night, the preacher locked him out. And so, bottom line, God used this story, Azusa Street, an African American man that God used to spark a movement. The story of William Seymour, you know, his father had fought in the Civil War. His father fought in the Union Army and was given emancipation that Abraham Lincoln had said any slave that would fight in the Union, that they would be given their freedom. Well, when did the Civil War end? If you look in history, it ended on April 9th, 1865. 41 years after, God rose up William Seymour on April 9th, the same day the Civil War ended, to bring a movement known as Azusa Street. And I'm not going to get into that today. I'm going to go into a message on it later that you can listen to. It's going to go live in a short time. It's probably already live. But anyway, what I'm saying is we're at that cusp that God is bringing a great awakening. And that was 120 years ago that it happened in Los Angeles. And so now this movie comes out, A Great Awakening. And George Whitfield, as you know, according to the movie, over 80% of the colonists received Christ. But before that time, Good Dog, there was many people that had been praying. There had been a massive group of people that just started to pray, waiting for an awakening. And so that's what happened. George Whitfield came, and it sparked something, and it ignited an awakening that I believe that we are at the door and the cusp of right now. But no, I love the movie. I thought it was amazing. And the fact it coincides with Resurrection Weekend or Easter, and now this week that we're coming in to, we're coming up to Pentecost. 50 days after the Passover is Pentecost, where God brought the Holy Spirit with a great outpouring of the Holy Ghost. And with the oil of the Lord that just, remember, on their heads was tongues of fire in that upper room on Pentecost, 50 days after Passover. Actually, on the day that Moses received the Torah, God brought forth the Holy Spirit in the New Covenant, in the New Testament. So it's quite amazing how the Old Testament and the New Testament sync up. And God says in Joel 2 that when they weep between the porch and the altar, meaning when you come before the Lord as a remnant and pray, the Lord said, and afterward I will pour out my spirit on your sons and your daughters. And that's what we've all been waiting for. We've been praying, we've been waiting, and we've been believing for this great awakening that is happening and is at the door, and I believe is here right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. Today is the April 9th, incidentally.
Yeah, April 9th, yes. Yeah, 120 years. And so it's exciting. So I also wanted to interject just because in literally a month, you guys, the Lord had spoken to me that that He told me to go to different areas of the country and open the heavens with the power of the Holy Spirit. And that's what we've been doing. We did it in Mount Rushmore area first, Chicago, Orlando area, down in Florida at Champions Church, Faith Chapel in San Diego, then up to Nampa in the Nampa Civic Center in the Boise area, then into Costa Mesa where the whole Jesus movement erupted in the late 60s, and then up to San Francisco on 11/1, where we saw some powerful prophetic voices, including Chuck Pierce, Lou Engle, and Pastor Cheon and Dave Bryan, that God cracked something in that city. But now we're going to Las Vegas. In fact, let's just put that up really quickly. Good dog. The flyer. This coming May 8th and 9th, we have the Open the Heavens in Las Vegas. Actually, there's been several prophetic words that God was going to pour out His Spirit in Las Vegas to the extent that it was going to be known as Salvation City. There's been several people that are fairly well-known prophetic voices that have had visitations from God that showed them 25 years ago that there was going to be a great awakening, that casinos were now going to become churches, and there was going to be that He's going to literally invade gambling casinos. And so this is only something that God can do. So Open the Heavens, Las Vegas at the Ahern Hotel, and it's going to be on March 8th, which is going to be in the evening starting at 6:30. We're going to have a great worship team actually from Las Vegas, and we've got many voices that are going to be there, including of course I'll be there, and we've got Sheila Holm and Juan 07. We've got Scott McKay, Patriot Street Fighter. We've also got Kathy O'Brien, who's actually been one of the voices that has been really fighting against the anti-trafficking in the country. She in the 60s by her own father was literally sold into the cabal under the proper Operation Paperclip and the MK Ultra mind control program. She's even, as she went before the Congress in the 80s and 90s, and her husband Mark literally wrote a book, Transformation. And so unbelievable stories. But then we've got Louis Herms, we've got Mark Messina, we've got Larry Ballard and Dr. Scott Young. There's going to be a lot of different people that are going to be there, that coming together on the different 7 mountains, bringing together. I believe that we are going to see the heavens open over Las Vegas. So you can register for free, or you can get your VIP. It's only $177 if you get it before the 15th of April. So you're going to want to act fast. There's only so many of those left. VIP includes special seating, in the venue. It also includes a VIP meet and greet with the speakers, and also a beautiful buffet, 4-star banquet upstairs in the Chop House at the Ahern Hotel. So we hope that you can come. Go to marycrowley.com and you can register for free or get your VIP. And we also have, there's a block of rooms that we have at, we have a block of room at the Ahern Theater, and it's very reasonable. It's about, $160 for a room, but there's also free parking and no resort fees. So it's actually a really good price. If you go to the Ahern, there'll be a link on my website, or if you call the Ahern Hotel, they will just say they're under Open the Heavens Mary Crowley. You have to get those in the next week or two because they're going to release any rooms that aren't purchased by then. But anyway, Open the Heavens, Las Vegas. It's going to be an amazing time. I believe that God is going to open the heavens over not only Las Vegas, but over America. Because as what happens in, they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but what happens in Vegas is literally, I believe, going to go out across the world. So anyway, it's going to be an exciting time. So we hope to see you there at Open the Heavens in Las Vegas. So anyway, get your tickets, Mary Crowley. Register for free, marycrowley.com, MERICROULEY.com, or you can register for VIP for $177 before, April 15th. So we might extend it a little longer, but try to get it before then. But anyway, thank you, Good Dog, for sharing that.
Not a problem. Yeah, in fact, thank you for doing what you're doing and going out there, because it's, you got to put the stuff up in advance before you get anybody behind it. And so it's quite a risk. And I appreciate you taking that risk. That's great.
Well, God said to do it. I'm only doing it because the Lord said. And, I woke up on May 2nd, 2020, Good Dog, and I heard him say, we won't shut up till you open the heavens. And he told me to do 7 baptisms along the Western Seaboard, which we did. And then he told me to do these events. And I was going to call it Open the Heavens, Prophets and Patriots Arise. And he said, no, open the heavens, let God arise. So, let God arise and his enemies be scattered. Only God is the one that can turn our country and the world around. It's only going to be God. And it always happens if my people, it says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, he said, then I will hear from heaven and heal your land. Only God can heal our land. As we're watching everything that's happening around the world, I was in Israel, as I told you. There was many missiles, many bombs. I was in bomb shelters many times, and we prayed. And, I was at the place, like, if you perish, you perish. Because, a missile can hit a bomb shelter. If a missile hits your bomb shelter, you're toast. You know what I'm saying? So the bomb shelter is only because if shrapnel or windows get blown out, it will protect you from that. But I'm telling you, the people right now over in Israel, that the last, since Purim, they've been, having to, you get alerted on your phones, sirens, it's just a way of life, but it's very traumatic because you don't know when the next one can come. And oftentimes, Good Dog, they come in the middle of the night, and then you have to get up, and oftentimes they have to wake up their kids and get them all roused and get them into the bomb shelter. And some families don't even have bomb shelters. So anyway, we really need to continue to pray for the Middle East and continue to pray that God is going to bring peace to the Middle East. So anyway, but there is a great awakening happening. I'm really excited about what we're going to see next.
Yeah, I want to pray also for the people of Iran. I think that if you look at Iran's history, it's very interesting. They didn't ask for this. It was a small cohort of CIA directed individuals who used the clergy and used academia to confound and overthrow the society, and do so with a fundamentalist weapon to basically instill a form of theocracy that is toxic to freedom. That is really what is at stake here. And setting free 93 million people, which are the population of Iran, means an end to the civilization of Nazism. And I think that is something worth praying for. An end to Nazism, Aryanism. And this is what is motivating the British Crown. That's really what is coming into an end here. And I think it's worthy of coming to an end. But we've got to speak it. We've got to say it. And we got to call unto God to make it so. that the people would be set free. Because as bad as it's been for those outside of Iran, it's been worse for the people inside Iran. Thousands of Americans have been killed by roadside bombs and other attacks of the Iranians. In fact, thousands of Iranian soldiers and terrorists have flooded across the border, mixed in with the 25 million illegal aliens it came across. And they're in our midst now. And, you know, the idea that Iran is taken care of, it isn't, because they're here. They're in our midst. And we've got to stand up for what's right and understand there's a cost for that. And the cost for freedom is often in blood. And I'm not asking for blood, but just rather we have to stand against it, or there won't be our children.
Few countries in the world are as old as Iran. It is home to one of the earliest civilizations in human history. Despite many foreign invasions from Mongols, Greeks, and Arabs, Iran has preserved its language, poetry, and unbreakable identity. This is the 5,000 years history of Iran. Before the word Iran existed, the Iranian plateau was already home to some of the earliest human communities in the world. By around 3000 BC, a powerful civilization known as Elam had emerged in southwestern Iran, centered around the city of Susa. Unlike many later empires, Elam was not founded by a single conqueror or ruler arriving from elsewhere. Instead, it developed gradually from the local populations already living in the region, who over centuries organized themselves into complex city-states and kingdoms. The Elamites created their own writing systems, built large temples and monumental structures, and became active participants in trade and conflict with neighboring Mesopotamian powers such as the Sumer and Babylon. For nearly 2,000 years, Elam remained one of the major powers of the ancient world. But by the 6th century BC, after repeated Assyrian invasions and the sack of Susa around 646 BC, the Elamite power finally collapsed. Its fall cleared the stage for the rise of the Achaemenid Empire. The true transformation of Iran began in the first millennium BC, when Indo-Iranian tribes from the Central Asian steppes migrated into the Iranian plateau. Over time, these migrating peoples settled across the plateau and gradually formed new societies. Among them were two groups that would shape the future of the region, the Medes and the Persians. The Medes were the first to establish a large Iranian kingdom in the 7th century BC, known as the Median Kingdom, uniting various tribes under a centralized authority. But it was their southern neighbors, the Persians, who created one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. In 550 BC, a man named Cyrus the Great changed the history of the region. Cyrus came from the Persian kingdom of Anshan, located in what is now Fars province in southwestern Iran. He defeated the Median king Astyages and united the Iranian tribes under his leadership. But Cyrus did not stop there. Within a few decades, his armies conquered the kingdom of Lydia in Anatolia, captured Babylon, and expanded Persian power eastward toward Central Asia. What made Cyrus remarkable was not only the speed of his conquests, but also his method of rule. Unlike many conquerors before him, he allowed local religions, traditions, and customs to continue. When he captured Babylon in 539 BC, he permitted exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. These policies were recorded on the famous Cyrus cylinder. It was a clay cylinder describing Cyrus's conquest of Babylon and his policy of restoring temples and returning displaced populations. Because of these ideas of tolerance and restoration, some modern scholars have described the Cyrus cylinder as one of the earliest expressions of human rights in history. Under Cyrus the Great and his successors, especially Darius I, the Achaemenid Empire became the largest empire the world had yet seen. At its peak under Darius I, it covered approximately 5.5 million square kilometers. The Persians built an advanced administrative system. They constructed long-distance roads, including the famous Royal Road, standardized taxation, and organized their vast lands into provinces called satrapies. Their imperial capital at Persepolis became a symbol of imperial power, where ambassadors from Egypt, Greece, and India came to present tribute. For nearly 2 centuries, this empire stood at the center of the known world. Then came its downfall. In 330 BC, the young Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great invaded Persia. Within just 8 years, the Achaemenid Empire collapsed. Persepolis was burned, and Alexander proclaimed himself the new ruler of Persia. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, his vast empire fragmented among his generals in a series of conflicts known as the Wars of the Diadochi. Control of Persia eventually fell to the Seleucid Empire, founded by Seleucus I Nicator. For nearly a century, the Seleucids ruled much of Iran. Greek cities were founded, Greek language and culture spread, and the region became part of a vast Hellenistic world, stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. Yet this foreign rule remained fragile. The Seleucid kings struggled to control their distant eastern territories, and local Iranian traditions and identities persisted beneath the surface. By the mid-3rd century BC, a new Iranian power began to rise in the northeast, which would eventually establish the Parthian Empire. The Parthians were originally nomadic Iranian people called the Parni from Central Asia. They settled in the region of Parthia in northeastern Iran and gradually expanded their control. Their rise began around 247 BC, when Arsaces I established an independent kingdom by taking advantage of the Seleucid Empire's weakening grip on its eastern territories. They called themselves the Arsacid dynasty, and over the next century they expanded to control the entire Iranian plateau and Mesopotamia. The Parthian Empire became Rome's eastern rival for centuries. They halted Roman expansion and maintained control over key trade routes, including segments of what would later be called the Silk Road. Parthian rule was decentralized, relying on noble families and regional autonomy. It preserved Iranian traditions while absorbing influences from both east and west. Then, in 224 AD, another transformation occurred. A Persian noble named Ardashir overthrew the last Parthian ruler Artabanus IV and founded the Sasanian Empire. Under the Sasanians, Iran once again became a highly centralized and powerful state. Zoroastrianism was established as the official religion, and Persian art, architecture, and scholarship flourished. The Sasanians fought long and exhausting wars against the Roman and later Byzantine empires. The Sasanian-Roman wars lasted for over 400 years. The final and most devastating war was from 602 to 628 AD, which drained the economic and manpower of both the empires. It was at this moment that a new force emerged from Arabia. Beginning in the 630s, Muslim Arab armies advanced into Sasanian territories. In the decisive battles of Qadisiyah and Nahavand, the Persian army was defeated. The last Sasanian king, Yazdegerd III, fled east and was executed in 651 AD, marking the end of the empire. With the fall of the empire, Iran gradually became part of the expanding Islamic world. Islam slowly spread across the region, transforming its religious landscape. Yet even under Arab rule, Persian culture endured. The Persian language was revived in a new form, written in Arabic script, and Iranian scholars, poets, and scientists played a central role in what historians call the Islamic Golden Age. Over the following centuries, various dynasties ruled Iran, the most important of which was the Seljuks. The Seljuks were a Turkic dynasty from the Central Asian steppes who converted to Islam. They rose to power in the 11th century by serving as military commanders for the Abbasid Caliphate, whose political authority had weakened over time. Eventually, the Seljuk leaders assumed real power themselves, establishing the Seljuk Empire. Under the Seljuks, much of the Iranian world experienced renewed political stability after centuries of fragmentation. Although the ruling elite were Turkic, they adopted many aspects of Persian culture and governance. Persian became the language of administration, literature, and scholarship across their empire. However, this stability did not last forever. In the early 13th century, the Mongols emerged from the east. Beginning in the 1220s, Mongol forces swept across Central Asia and into Iran with devastating speed, destroying entire cities and causing massive loss of life. Yet even this catastrophe did not permanently break Iran's cultural continuity. By the mid-13th century, Hulagu Khan established a new ruling state in the region known as the Ilkhanate. Over time, the Mongol rulers gradually adopted the traditions of the lands they governed. Many converted to Islam, embraced Persian administrative systems, and supported Persian scholars and artists. The first Ilkhanid ruler to accept Islam was Tekuder, but the real turning point came in 1295 when Ghazan Khan converted and declared Islam the official religion of the Ilkhanate. From that point onward, the Mongol rulers of Iran increasingly adopted Islam and Persian culture. However, the Ilkhanate itself did not last forever. After the death of Abu Sa'id Bahadur Khan in 1335, the Ilkhanate began to collapse. Without a strong successor, rival Mongol commanders and local dynasties fought for control of the region. As a result, Iran once again fragmented into several smaller states ruled by competing powers such as the Jalayirids, the Muzaffarids, and other regional dynasties. For several decades, no single authority was able to reunite the Iranian plateau. This period of political fragmentation continued until the late 14th century, when a new conqueror rose from Central Asia. Timur first rose to power as a skilled military commander during the political chaos that followed the breakup of the Mongol Chagatai Khanate. Through a combination of alliances and relentless military campaigns, he gradually defeated rival tribal leaders and eventually established the Timurid Empire. Although his campaigns were often devastating and many Iranian cities suffered greatly during his invasions, the Timurid period later became a remarkable era of cultural revival. Timur and his successors patronized Persian scholars, architects, and artists. Cities such as Samarkand and Herat flourished as major centers of Persian literature, architecture, and science. However, the Timurid Empire gradually weakened during the 15th century as rival factions fought for power. Iran once again fragmented into smaller states ruled by competing dynasties and tribal confederations. Political instability spread across the region, creating conditions ripe for the rise of a new power. Then, in 1501, a turning point reshaped Iran's identity permanently. A young leader named Ismail I founded the Safavid Empire. After establishment of the Safavid Empire, Ismail I declared Twelver Shia Islam the official religion of the state. This decision distinguished Iran sharply from its largely Sunni neighbors, especially the powerful Ottoman Empire. Even as Iranians adopted this new religious framework, they fiercely preserved their ancient cultural heritage. This dual identity, Persian in culture and Shia in religion, would become a defining feature of Iran. Under the Safavids, particularly during the reign of Shah Abbas I, Iran entered a period of cultural and economic revival. The capital city of Isfahan was transformed into one of the most magnificent cities of the early modern world, famous for its grand mosques and impressive public squares. Trade flourished, art and architecture reached new heights, and the Safavid state firmly established the foundations of modern Iranian identity. However, by the early 18th century, Safavid power began to decline due to internal corruption, economic difficulties, and external pressures. This decline eventually led to invasions and political chaos. For a brief moment, the military genius Nader Shah restored Iranian power in the mid-18th century, even launching a famous campaign into India and capturing the wealth of Delhi. But his empire collapsed soon after his death. In the late 18th century, the Qajar dynasty rose to power and established a new monarchy in Iran. By this time, however, powerful European empires were expanding their influence across Asia. The Russian Empire began pushing southward, seizing territories in the Caucasus, while the United Kingdom sought to dominate southern Iran to protect its colonial interests in India. Although Iran was never formally colonized, it increasingly found itself trapped between these competing powers. Foreign concessions, political pressure, and economic exploitation weakened the state. By the early 20th century, the discovery of oil further intensified foreign interference, which led to the public uprising. The revolution of 1906, known as the Persian Constitutional Revolution, was ignited by the foreign interference. The people forced the Shah to grant a constitution and create a national parliament. For the first time in Iran's long history, people hoped for a government limited by law rather than absolute monarchy, but it didn't happen. The rival empires of United Kingdom and Russian Empire feared a strong independent Iran. With their backing, the Shah crushed the movement and plunged the country back into instability. This instability continued till 1925, when a former military officer, Reza Shah, seized power and established the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah was determined to transform Iran into a modern state. He built railways, strengthened the army, opened modern schools and universities. In 1935, he officially named the country Iran, meaning Land of the Aryans. This continued until World War II. During World War II, Reza Shah tried to balance foreign powers but showed sympathy toward Nazi Germany, hoping it might counter British and Soviet influence. That decision backfired. In 1941, Allied forces from United Kingdom and the Soviet Union invaded Iran, forced Reza Shah to abdicate, and placed his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, on the throne. The new Shah initially ruled under heavy political pressure, and in 1951, a charismatic nationalist leader, Mohammad Mossadegh, became prime minister and took drastic steps. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, taking control from the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Britain responded with economic sanctions and a global oil boycott. When Mossadegh refused to back down, Britain secretly turned to the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence launched Operation Ajax, overthrowing Mossadegh and restoring the Shah's authority. After the coup, Mohammad Reza Shah ruled with far greater power. Backed strongly by the United States during the Cold War, he turned Iran into one of Washington's key allies in the Middle East. American military aid flowed into the country, and Iran purchased vast amounts of Western weapons. The Shah created feared secret police, SAVAK, to silence critics. At the same time, he launched the White Revolution, a sweeping program of land reform, industrialization, and social change. While these policies modernized parts of the economy, they also disrupted traditional society, enriched elites, and widened the gap between rich and poor. This created resentment among the population. The resentments were further intensified in 1971 when the Shah spent enormous sums hosting a spectacular celebration at the ruins of Persepolis, marking what he called 2,500 years of Persian monarchy. This gave an opportunity to his critics, among which the most determined one was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Ayatollah Khomeini was one of the most vocal critics of the Shah and his policies. Because of his opposition, he was exiled in 1964, first to Iraq and later to France. From exile, he continued to influence events inside Iran, as his speeches were recorded and smuggled back on cassette tapes. He portrayed the Shah as a tyrant dependent on the United States and called for an Islamic system based on justice, independence, and support for the poor. His message gradually gained momentum, and by 1978, protests had turned into a nationwide uprising. Millions of Iranians took to the streets, and the regime's attempts to suppress them only intensified the unrest. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza left the country. Just weeks later, on February 1st, Khomeini returned to Tehran to a massive reception. Within months, the monarchy collapsed, and in April 1979, the Islamic Republic of Iran was established through a national referendum. The revolution marked a major shift in Iran's foreign policy. Under Khomeini, Iran adopted the principle of neither East nor West, rejecting alignment with both the United States and the Soviet Union. Relations with Washington collapsed after the Iran hostage crisis, beginning decades of tension and hostility. Only a year later, Iran was drawn into a devastating war. In 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, starting the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted 8 years. The conflict caused massive loss of life and economic damage, ending in 1988 without major territorial changes. After Khomeini's death in 1989, leadership passed to Ali Khamenei. Under his rule, Iran maintained a cautious but often confrontational stance toward the West. While continuing to oppose US influence in the region, Iran also engaged in selective diplomacy when necessary. One key example was the Iran nuclear deal, aimed at easing sanctions in exchange for limits on Iran's nuclear program. However, tensions remained high, especially after the United States withdrew from the agreement in 2018. By the mid-2020s, relations between Iran and the United States were still strained, marked by periodic crises and limited diplomatic engagement. The two countries engaged in talks in the end of 2025, but the situation escalated again after the death of Khamenei in 2026.
Well, we only have about 10 minutes left, everybody. We will have Good Dog come back on, but as we come to the end of this program today, you know, we were talking, we showed a clip about the Great Awakening. We talked about the Azusa Street outpouring, which happened 120 years ago, about, my event that's coming up, which is not an event, it's a convergence. But we're at the door of history, and all the signs of what we've seen through every great awakening, because you've studied this extensively. You talked about oftentimes it happens right before a great war breaks out in history. Why don't you just, for the record, go down, like in particular, some of the great awakenings, like the first and second great awakening. One was before the American Revolution, which was what was happening with George Whitefield. And then the second one really happened before the Civil War. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me give you the cadence, because there's a specific cadence, a pattern of cultural and societal, civilizational strife. And the way it starts is it starts with corruption, which is at first, accepted. It's allowed to happen. It's allowed to propagate. Everybody's making bank, and so everybody's fat, dumb, and happy. And then all of a sudden, you've got a real systemic challenge to the society. In the case of England, and in the first one, this was the Battle of 1588 when the Spanish came up and said, "Hey, stop being pirates against our pirate ships coming back from the Americas. Don't do that anymore." And they were going to essentially wipe out the British Crown. Well, God stopped that for some reason. He stopped it in 1588 with that amazing battle sequence where the entire Spanish Armada was wiped out in a storm. It was the most amazing thing. 132 ships of the line. And these were not small ships. These were, a good 400, 500-ton ships. Back in the day, that was a pretty big deal. And, there were 20,000 troops on those ships, and many of them died. So God put his hand in the midst of that. Well, what happened after that was the truth tried to manifest itself and to plant or seed the soil because it was an answered prayer. The people were praying against this armada, and those prayers were heard. And the seeds that which were planted, the enemy who took over control of that society didn't want that to happen. So they concocted an attack on the Capitol and blamed a disfavored political group that were behind it. And then they used that ever since to go after their political enemies and use the infinite power of the state against the lowly powers of the individual, which is always a lopsided affair. And so that's really the next step. The next step after that leads to persecution. And this persecution begins very privately, but eventually it splits out into the open, and entire groups are imprisoned. And this imprisonment then leads to a banishment, which was the Puritans coming to the Americas. And from that, there is a contract that is signed, a deal between man and God. And in the Pilgrims' case, or the Puritans' case, because it was the Pilgrims, the Puritans, and the Separatists that were on that ship, the Mayflower, that contract, when it was signed, essentially heralded the end of that Great Awakening. The Great Awakening, thus, being you have to be willing to stand up for the truth, no matter what happens, even if it means your life. That was essentially the lesson. That same pattern of behavior of piracy or corruption happening on the back end, leading to a conflict, leading to a pause, leading to persecution, leading to imprisonment, leading to banishment, leading to a contract, a deal with God, is the thing that is being repeated over and over and over again. And it's happening even now. It's the most amazing thing. It's happening even now. And so that's what we're seeing play out. And how it ends up in the end, God wins in the end. We know that every word of the Bible will be correct. Our understanding of it will be counseled and educated by what God reveals. But it looks like we're coming up on the end of this era of global Arianism that has been happening on the back end. And the ones that are behind it, incidentally, are the very ones clamoring against it, which is very strange. It's projection. Let's say I'm a Nazi. I'm projecting my Nazism on you, and you're the bad guy. It's kind of like tag with a laser pointer. Tag, and that's really what's going on. But it's an end of that. It's the truth that's coming out, and the truth is the only thing that matters in the end, anyway. And that's how it's going to work out.
Well, we are going to see that God is going to awaken the hearts of people. And, the enemy tries to get everybody so engaged in their phones, in their own little lives. And, now even people are listening to podcasts, which we're happy that they're growing and learning. But, sometimes they're being distracted from the real cause. Like even David said, is there not a cause? It's a cause for Christ. And, God is going to bring freedom to the hearts and souls of man. And that is what Christ did. He did that at Calvary. And, that's what the enemy will try to do, get you so distracted that you're not going to see Christ. And oftentimes he allows persecution to come, because when the persecution comes, that's when people start to pray. And, we're at the dawning of a new day, and we're at the door of another awakening that is on the culture that is here. So, let's continue to rise up and pray. Let's continue to obey, and let's continue to stay the course. God is our source, and he's actually going to divorce what the demonic realm has done, because we've made covenants, sometimes contracts, with what we've done with the enemy. And that's what's happening in America. When the Mayflower Compact was signed, that was a contract with God, a covenant actually with God. And so in 1620, God listened to that covenant, and our nation is one nation founded under God. And so at this 250-year anniversary of the founding of our nation, I believe that something is shifting, and he's going to bring forth salvation. And it's going to be a new season of declaration that God will now bring into our world, in particular America, transformation for the greatest show that the world has ever seen, that God will now give you back your dream. And so it's going to be an exciting scene, because he's going to bring, the people on the scene. And oftentimes, Good Dog, he uses the remnant, the people that are hidden. And, he uses the remnant to literally bring forth these movements. And even the story of George Whitefield, he was an actor. He wanted to be an actor. And, the story is an amazing story, going to Oxford. You guys have to go out and see that. A Great Awakening. It's in the theaters. Go, as many of you as you can. It's an incredible movie. So, Good Dog, thank you so much for coming on today. We were going to get into some other topics, but Holy Spirit kind of led it on a different route. Where can people find you, Good Dog, to watch your shows and find out more about how they can even support you?
Sure. You go to our website. It's gooddog-usa.com. And our shows are there. You also find us on Rumble and, 18 different our locations as well. We are not on YouTube. YouTube doesn't appreciate what we have to say.
Yeah. Well, they're starting to give some people back their channels. I got back on YouTube.
No, not for us.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Yeah. Well, anyway, we love you, Good Dog, and Cubits and Buttercup, and we know that God is doing something new. So continue, guys, to stay the course and pray, and know that this is the hour that God will say, and we will say, look what the Lord has done. So remember, go to marycrowley.com. You can register for free or get your VIP tickets for only $177, which includes VIP seating, includes meet and greet with all the speakers and guests, and also to have a VIP 4-star buffet banquet luncheon upstairs in the Chop House at the Ahern Hotel. There's actually special pricing for rooms at the Ahern Hotel. It's only for another week or so. So if you're going to get a room at the Ahern, you're going to have to do it now because otherwise they're going to release the rooms, to other people. So anyway, you can go to marycrowley.com. We'll have a link on there for the rooms as well. So God bless you. Thanks for watching. Please follow, share, subscribe, hit the like button because it does help with the algorithms. They've really tried to shadow ban me, and even on Rumble, I've been shadow banned. So really, if you can share this with 5 people, it's really going to help us, and hit the like button and make comments. It makes a difference too when you make comments in the algorithms. We're in a whole new world with all this, with podcasts and different things. It sure has changed. Things surely have changed in the last 20 years, haven't they? But 120 years from Azusa Street. But I believe God said it's going to be the greatest show on earth. So thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Thanks for coming on. Good dog. Bless you.
Thanks for having us. See you later.